Welcome to the Uyaphi interview. We're going to discuss fair trade in tourism. And I have in the office with me today Lisa Scriven. Now Lisa, you were the managing or certification director for fair trade tourism in South Africa.
Yes, for almost 5 years I was their certification manager.
Now let's take a step back. What is fair trade in tourism?
You might be familiar with the idea of fair trade in commodities. You've probably had a cup of fair trade coffee at some time in your life, or seen fair trade crafts and that. That was a global movement that started in Germany about 30 years ago, with the principles around, fair working conditions, respect for the environment, culture, fair procurement practices. But it looked at the commodity itself. So the coffee, how was it produced, and was that fair? So were the farmers paid good wages, so they had good working conditions? Minimum prices as well were incorporated into the idea of commodities, but it didn't apply to tourism. Tourism being a service sector, so the trading in services is a lot different than commodities. So the IUCN, the World Conservation Union, their South African office, took the ideas of fair trade in the commodity sector and thought, wow, these are a lot of the developmental objectives we have for South Africa. And the region, I mean, it's not just South Africa, but can we apply it to the tourism sector for the benefit of the sector, for the people, for the environment, etc.? So that's where it started. So those principles were then translated to the tourism sector with a bit of it's a different process in terms of the audit, the verification of how things are going on. And we do work with, Fair Trade Tourism does work with Fair Flow, the international organization, on a number of initiatives. But it's not the same organization. The principles are the same, so those are then extrapolated and applied to the tourism sector.
Okay, so fair trade in tourism is purely a South African organisation.
Yes.
And are these principles, is this being taken as a test bed, is being rolled up in other countries? What's happening?
Yeah, well in fact, my introduction with fair trade, they're now called Fair Trade Tourism, for precisely the reason that they want to be regional. So when I joined them in 2007, they were Fair Trade and Tourism South Africa, and I had, prior to joining them, written their first regional expansion strategy. So I left Fair Trade Tourism a couple of years ago, and they're now in the process of expanding regionally. The name change, rebranding, they actually just launched Fair Trade Tourism in Madagascar, and they have received support from the Swiss government to roll out in a few other neighbouring countries. So
effectively, FTT, Fair Trade Tourism, is an NGO.
Correct.
And it's an NGO which is respected and has international recognition. And what I see, obviously, we ourselves are a major part of the tourism industry, and we see these FTT labels going on. What happens? How do you get that certification? How important is it to a lodge or a hotel?
Well, there are a number of certification programs for the tourism sector globally. In fact, approximately 120 the last time I checked. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. There is a global body that sort of has been set up to check on whether or not they're checking everything they should be. Okay, that's called the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. Fair Trade, in January 2011, it was announced that Fair Trade Tourism Standard was officially recognized by the GSTC, and it was only one of 10 in the world. So it is up there with the best. It's very robust. It's not easy. It's certainly not a rubber stamp process. It means a lot, and the impact of the businesses that are certified by Fair Trade Tourism, they mean it. You can't, it's not the kind of process you can get through just with lip service.
Okay. Obviously there's a process. If you're a lodge, let's take an example, you're a lodge in the Kruger, and you want to have this certification because you hear it's be good for your business, or you believe in some of the principles. What concretely do you have to do?
I think the first thing that would be important for a lodge to know is you first of all have to mean it. A lot of people think, ooh, the brand, that'll look nice next to my 5-star rating or whatever. I've done probably, 35, 70, call it 200 audits of lodges, guest houses, activities, etc. across the country. If they don't mean it, they don't pass. I mean, there's no way. So first and foremost, you have to actually care about the principles. It's been restructured since I left, but when I was there were 13 operating areas that were audited, all of which were verifiable. So if you look at labor conditions, for example, things like pay slips, payroll runoffs, etc., would all be verified on site. So there had to be documentation. Interviews are conducted with staff. If there are any community partners, they're also interviewed. It's very, very robust. But there's, Fair Trade Tourism and other organizations, they've produced a plethora of supportive tools to help business. So Fair Trade Tourism, for example, has a Fair Trade manual that anyone who's interested in being certified can access. And it's literally step by step in terms of what kinds of things, what kinds of things you think about, who should be involved, how can you structure it. Yeah. So they really are trying to be a support in terms of business development to the sector, and also then verifying what they are doing.
Right, so let's say you do believe in all this, like an organisation. One of the benefits to you as a business for having that certification, does it have a meaningful impact on your business? I.e., does it bring in more clients?
That was always a question when I worked with the organization, and I think it's a question asked by anyone who wants to pursue any kind of certification, whether it be fair trade. There's also the Heritage Environmental Rating Program, which is a very reputable certification program in the country. There are a few others, many globally, like I said. I think the big push that I heard the feedback from clients, what was really pushing them in the end, is that more consumers are asking for it. There's definitely an increase in demand for products. Some businesses still aren't seeing that, but then I asked the question, well, do you communicate what you do? So it's there's a little bit of reluctance to sort of market your sustainability. People aren't asking for it, etc. But I don't know, were people asking for Crocs before we made those? No, someone did it and they marketed it like crazy and then made people wear them. If you wear Crocs, you can get people to ask for sustainability.
I agree.
So, maybe a poor example, but yeah, so it's a bit of a chicken and the egg when you're looking at what people refer to as the early adopter stage. But I think that's growing now, and it's not a trend, it's not temporary. You've got Wilderness Safaris was just recognized for the transparency in reporting, for their sustainability reporting on the JSE listed companies. There are huge strides like that. Global Reporting Initiative with businesses listed on the American stock exchanges, New York Stock Exchange. They're almost peer required to report on sustainability.
Is that, now, it's the other phrase, when you talk about sustainability, especially in tourism, you hear this phrase, greenwashing, okay? Tokenism, gesturism, without any real deep or meaningful impact on communities which they're actually working or operating in.
Yeah.
Does that happen a lot, or is that a much abused phrase?
No, it absolutely happens a lot, yeah. Okay. I think you'd be shocked. I just finished working on a project with two well-known people in the sector, Colin Bell and David Bristow. They've just published a huge, I think it's 440-page coffee table book called Africa's Finest. The top sustainable safari destinations in sub-Saharan Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. It's an amazing publication. No one paid to be in it. No one was allowed to pay to be in it. All of the assessors volunteered their time. I was one of them. And we physically visited every single business that was considered for that book. I'm not going to name names, of course, if you didn't make it, but if they're not in there, it was either an oversight, which it was open, anyone was allowed to be considered, or there's a reason why they're not in there.
Is it, so greenwashing, give me an example, what is it, without naming names?
Yeah, no, sure. Well, for example, someone might say, we have this vibrant engagement with our local community, building business. So there's a lot of general, if you read about someone and the description is very general about what they're doing, that can be a bit of a red flag. Or if it was something they did 12 years ago and they haven't maintained it, they haven't done anything since, there's a lot of that you'll find. And sometimes they'll report on plans, we intend to, and they never do it. Intend to, that was 5 years ago you wrote that and you've still not taken step one towards doing it. So there's a lot of people do try and milk how sexy sustainability is by, sort of sidestepping, like those examples I just mentioned. And it's detrimental because the people who are doing it, you're robbing them, really.
No, sure. But like in anything which becomes fashionable, but people want to jump on the bandwagon and say, let's go work there too. That's human nature. On a slightly different topic, fair trade tourism, is it more appropriate for country or remote locations than it is, say, like for being in the city? Can you be an FTT registered business in a city, in an urban environment?
Yeah, of all the businesses that are certified in South Africa, they're in various contexts, various sizes as well, various ownership structures, community-owned lodges, for example, and right through to a big corporate lodge.
But in a city environment.
Absolutely.
Oh, really? Okay, so you could be a guest house in Cape Town, for example, and you could be FTT registered.
Yeah, well, the 4 Mercure hotels in the country, all 4 of them are certified.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and those are all considered those are business hotels. Yeah.
Okay, and how do they, just as a matter of interest, how do they get registered as being sustainable in their city locations?
Yeah, exactly the same process as anywhere. The process of the audit is the same. One of the tricks of the certification program is it has to be flexible enough to be able to be applied to different contexts. Yeah. So if you say a business has water monitoring measures in place and initiatives to save water, for example, you can do that whether you're a 3-room rural guest house or a big 500-room hotel. Yeah, how much you save and how you do it, that'll be different. But the fact that you're doing it is, that's you can transfer that to any context.
If you look in South Africa in particular, there must be thousands and thousands of establishments, from large hotels to small guest houses. What sort of number or percentage would you put to who are actually adhering, without necessarily being registered, but adhering to the principle of sustainable tourism?
There's no way to really know who is adhering, because first, to verify they were adhering, they would have to be, someone would have to go and check that. In terms of, if you look at the pool of businesses that are certified by someone, not necessarily fair trade tourism, compared to the total number of accommodation establishments in the country, it's about 1%,
okay,
which is obviously microscopic, but it is on par with what's happening globally. So Ecotourism Australia, for example, is the biggest certification program in the world. They are also sitting at about 1%. Yeah. It is growing, but it's a very, very small proportion of the businesses that are out there. Who else might be doing things and just not be certified? That's probably a very different figure. Whether it would be, close to 50% or not, I would be surprised if it was. But yeah.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned about these different countries, because we certainly get the impression that there is interest in sustainable tourism, and there's more mention it when we get inquiries from our clients. Certainly, it's perhaps dominated by certain territories. For example, Northern Europeans are certainly more interested in this phenomenon of the effects on people from Southern Europe or from the UK, for example.
Okay. Well, I think that was strategically quite interesting that when the World Conservation Union started fair trade tourism as a project, is that they specifically wanted to use the language of fair trade because there was an awareness of the term in Europe predominantly. And those tend to be the main markets that are buying. Fair trade tourism 2 years ago launched fair trade holiday packages, which you're probably familiar with. So, which is more similar to a FLOW, the international commodity audit, in that it looks at the supply chain.
Okay.
Okay, so that's recently been launched so that travel agents and tour operators can now sell fair trade certified holiday packages. So the contractual terms, etc., have been verified as well, and that's quite attractive to the European markets. Because they're very familiar with and buying and the fair trade commodities, and that's interestingly growing double digits year on year in terms of increase in consumption.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, but overall, if you take over the whole sector, do you think now this big push in sustainable tourism, do you actually see concrete benefits to the country? Let's take South Africa, for example.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, unequivocally. I mean, I can only look at it as benefits to a local area, but then you can extrapolate that to the whole country. I mean, absolutely. And interestingly, some businesses I've heard say, yeah, but we're just small. How can we possibly make a difference? I actually think that I've seen, there are exceptions of course, but I've seen more meaningful and higher density impact, if I can say that, positive impacts from the smaller businesses. Predominantly because they generally have better communication and tighter links with their local community. So what they do is really meaningful, and it's not, charitable. I donate my used sheets every 3 years kind of stuff, which I find quite, not really an acceptable tick mark in terms of your community investment. So the smaller places do some incredible things, and the large places do as well. But they have more to pull from. So I think if there was a way to calculate proportionately who does more, I bet you'd be surprised to learn that the small guys do so much more. It's brilliant.
Actually, I don't think you would be surprised. I quite agree. It's always the sort of small businesses that sort of lead the way. I think there's trends that picked up from the larger corporates and say, well, we have to do something.
Yeah.
To do that.
Yeah, and they're accountable generally to larger number of shareholders, etc., so it's harder to convince them as well. But
no, absolutely. So you no longer work for Fair Trade Tourism. You have your own independent company.
I do, yeah. Just I think when I was with Fair Trade, I noticed the big need was for businesses to be handheld. And I don't say that in a condescending way at all. They're very busy running tourism businesses, trying to do things right. They simply don't always have the time to implement things, to change, tweak things, get a different system in place. They really needed assistance with that. And for Fair Trade Tourism, it's a bit of a conflict to be auditing and hand-holding. You can't kind of check your own work. That's obviously not very independent. So yeah, I wanted to take a step back and focus more on the business development side, which is what I'm doing.
Okay, so you're advising now companies or operations who want to be registered, who want to be certificated in some way, and you're advising on the process of how to do it.
Yep. Walking through it with them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, you're obviously a Canadian. I hear from the twang.
An Irish Canadian,
Irish,
yes.
and you're here in South Africa. Do you enjoy living here, down in South Africa, in Muizenberg?
Yeah, I've been here for 14 years. Yeah, so definitely I've been bitten by the African bug.
Do you, we agree, but do you think in terms of going back to fair trade, do you think it's more prevalent here in the African continent, or the awareness now, than other continents or other tourism areas?
I think a big factor on that for me is that there's a disconnect between the demand side of the market and what is needed in the destinations. Let's take Europe, for example. When they think about sustainability, they think green. They think energy light bulbs, filtering water, etc. So they very much are on the environmental impact side of things. Lowering carbon emissions, offsets, tree planting, which is important. However, when you look at a destination in any developing country, really, environmental impacts are only one part of it. The social and economic impacts are massive. And the true definition of sustainability incorporates those, as it does within sustainable tourism, as it does in fair trade tourism. So you often, for me, I struggle because you've got the travelers who are asking, well, how much of your waste do you recycle? And how much water do you save? And that's like, well, how much do you do for your community? Or how, so the demand is for green. So a lot of businesses are pushed a bit by the market to just focus on green. And I think that's to the detriment of what the businesses could be doing in the destination. Whether it's a lack of awareness or just a simple, what they know is what's at home, right? So that's a tricky thing, and I think it's very, very important for destinations to maintain the focus on all three areas.
Well, on a personal note, travelling around Africa quite widely, I would say that in many operations in these remote locations, because it's basically going to some countries, you're going to very remote locations, they do a wonderful job in actually bringing in the supply chain from the communities, training up staff. That has to be to the good.
Absolutely. It does. It makes business sense. You think about a company who, say, in Kenya, rural Kenya, who's bringing everything in from Nairobi. The travel costs of that, the managing your supply chain and stock and everything, what a nightmare, hey? So if you can get something going locally in terms of fresh vegetables, certain things that can be supplied locally, what a pleasure for the lodge. I actually, for that Africa's Finest project, visited a business outside of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, on the border of Sidani National Park. They have done more than any other business I've ever seen for local socioeconomic development. It was absolutely brilliant. They don't buy anything from Dar anymore. And when they started, there was absolutely nothing available locally. We went to the village, there were all these little corners of markets, a bicycle repair shop now, you know, it's just this buzzing little economy of literally sand roads, and it's not even a village, it's just, you know, a very, very small settlement. But brilliant, and they supply everything to the lodge.
Well, that's a very good example. In a word, sustainable development, is that the future?
I don't think there's an alternative.
Lisa, thank you very much for speaking with us.
It's a pleasure, Chris.